Hello, and welcome to the Book of Heroes podcast. We are a weekly show dedicated to helping you make better ethical decisions about Storybook Brawl. I'm Sidney, and this is my co-host Jesse. How's it going, Jesse?
Pretty good, thanks for asking. If you couldn't tell by today's intro, today's topic is going to be a lot different from normal, because we're going to be talking about the recent Storybook Brawl news, rather than having a strategy episode.
Yeah, this is definitely a new one for us. We're used to covering, in-game strategy, tournaments, that sort of thing. But this past week, we did get some real-world news that has been fairly controversial. And today, we are planning to talk through it and lay out what happened, why people are upset, and give our points of view. And we also do want to talk about the future of the show going forward.
But first, we have a listener question.
This is the only piece of strategy you'll get today, folks.
Today's listener question comes from Astriel, who asked, "My question is inspired by Sidney's story at the end of episode 23. I also came across a situation where my opponent ran a 4 or 5 character board after I beat them in their standard summon comp to take advantage of a crocked hippocampus and reduplicator. They then gave a couple more story anecdotes before asking, when is it appropriate to run your board with fewer than 7 characters? Some early game instances come to mind, like putting Stag in 2 with an empty slot in 1, or if you're running Monkey's Paw. Can you think of any other times it is correct to do so, particularly in the late game?"
Yeah, this is a good question, and I think the simple answer to when is it correct to run 6 characters is when that makes your board stronger than running 7. And generally speaking, that means you have a character in slot 2 that you really want to attack first, which would be Copycat, the White Stag, or the Chupacabra. Although that last example is probably not too relevant in any recent metagame.
Yeah, or if some ability such as Monkey Paws requires you to do so, and that +5/+5 spread across your other characters is not as strong as running a 7th character. I would like to point out that it's almost always correct to play a 7th character and with 0 attack whenever you can, just because it has the opportunity to waste your opponent's attack and decrease the chance of your important character getting sniped or attacked early. So if you haven't played any Gingerbread Houses or any random buffs that increase attack, characters like Rotten Apple Tree or Sultak Ancient are strictly better in most scenarios.
Yeah, you can also use an unbuffed Lightning Dragon to fill that same function, since it almost always dies after the first attack. And honestly, if it didn't, that's probably good for you anyway. I think in practice, most of the time when I do this, it's in the early game with the White Stag. I find that often having the White Stag be more likely to attack is stronger than a random 2/2. Or if I'm doing something crazy with like Copycats, and usually probably Copycats plus summons in the late game.
Yeah, I guess the one scenario we didn't cover is if you are summoning multiple of a character, like maybe you have an upgraded Copycat in front of a Crocbait, and you have a Reduplicator, it might make sense to leave a couple of spaces blank on your board to get the maximum number of your strongest summon possible. Even though that really increases the risk of you getting attacked first and losing out on that said Copycat, you might just need those extra powerful summons to win, which effectively makes you stronger.
Yeah, and I think that pretty much covers it.
Yeah, so with that, we wanted to start with a bit of an announcement before jumping into the show notes.
Yeah, we mentioned we'd talk about the future of the show, and we didn't want to bury the lead here.
Yeah, so I have not been playing as much Storybook Brawl in recent weeks, so I will be stepping down as a host of the podcast. This has been a decision that we've been discussing for a bit of time now, but basically it boils down to I've been playing Storybook Brawl for over 8 months at this point. I've got several hundred hours into the game. I'm ready to move on and play more other games, get some variety. I usually move on from games just to get a variety of experiences, so it's about time that I moved on from Storybook Brawl. I also kind of hit all of the things that I wanted to do in the game, reaching high ranks, playing the tournament, that sort of thing. So the game is feeling a little bit repetitive for me at this point, which is contributing to my decision.
Yeah, well, like you said, Jesse, it's not a surprise, and I actually want to say this is something that we decided last week before the most recent news about the FTX acquisition.
Yeah, this is in no way related to today's topic, though it could have been in a different world.
Yeah. As far as where that leaves the show, I have still been excited about the game. I think the news that we're going to talk about today has affected that to some degree, But to be honest, I'm somewhat undecided about whether I want to continue on with the show. We'll talk through some of the reasons for that. But in short, the show is going to be taking a break next week, and on the following week, I'll make an announcement as to where we're going from here. That announcement might be in the form of a new podcast episode, or it might be in the form of a very short podcast episode saying goodbye and thanks for all the fish. But regardless, Jesse, it's been great hosting the show with you. I have some more to say about that at the end. But this decision also came at sort of an interesting time because we do have a pretty notable news topic to cover today.
Yeah, so moving on to today's topic then, as Sidney mentioned, Storybook Brawl was acquired by a company named FTX. And so for today's topic, we're going to be talking about what happened, why it happened, why this is a controversial topic, and then finally give our opinions on it in roughly that order.
Yeah, and I think something we should emphasize is that, we're presenting what we know. I've done a lot of research, and I know you have too, Jesse.
Not as much as you, but still some, yes.
Yeah, but, fundamentally, we're not professionals. I think this is both of our first experiences reporting on a real-life event. So we're going to do our best. Just, take what we say with that grain of salt, and we'll do our best to present our sources in the show notes, and definitely feel free to double-check things and come to your own conclusions. We should also mention that neither of us have been affiliated with Goodluck Games, the company that makes Storybook Brawl, outside of doing a podcast that covers their game, and they did give us giveaway codes, which is a program that applied to a lot of people that do Storybook Brawl content, and neither of us have been involved in cryptocurrency or NFTs or anything along those lines.
Yep, and finally, it is just the opinion of two people who are hosting a podcast. That does not have any more weight than your opinion or the opinions of those around you, so we just figured we'd throw our 2 cents in, and you can take that as you will.
Yeah, and even if you don't agree with our conclusions, hopefully some of the information in this episode will help you make a decision that you feel good about.
Okay, and with that, let's talk about what happened, the facts behind the news from earlier this week. Sidney, what happened?
Well, on Tuesday, March 22nd, Goodluck Games, there were a few news articles, and Storybook Brawl also posted their own news article saying that they were bought by a company called FTX US. If you've never heard of that, you are not alone.
Yeah, I personally, this is not a company I was familiar with, so I had to read into what they were doing, or what they were about.
Yeah, so FTX is a cryptocurrency exchange. It's similar to a stock market, but it's a way to buy and sell cryptocurrencies. I think Bitcoin is the most well-known one. They also sell NFTs, which we'll talk about more later, and other digital products.
Yeah, so if you've never heard of what some of these things are, a cryptocurrency is a digital currency similar to a dollar or a euro, except it's not affiliated with a specific country or region.
Right. The way they work is fairly complicated, but generally speaking, cryptocurrencies are decentralized, they're not affiliated with the government, and they're built on a technology called blockchain, which allows you to create a sort of list of transactions, a digital ledger saying, I have this amount of money and I can send you this amount of money.
The other terminology thing here is NFT, which stands for Non-Fungible Token. A non-fungible token is built on the same technology as a cryptocurrency. It's basically akin to a digital receipt saying that you own a particular thing, usually an image, in this scenario.
Right. And that definition of ownership is not legal. We'll talk about some of the criticisms of that idea later, but it's not like a legal copyright. So, some other things to know about FTX. This is actually a company that operates out of the Bahamas. FTX US is what was mentioned in the news article as having bought Goodluck Games. That's actually a separate exchange. The US version of FTX is, as I understand it, a little more regulated.
This is not particularly relevant to the discussion, but it is a distinction to keep in mind in case you see other news articles cropping up about the company.
Yeah. Some context for FTX. It was founded in 2019, and it's grown very quickly as a company. They're valued at about $32 billion. So a point of comparison would be Activision Blizzard, which owns Hearthstone, World of Warcraft, other games, is currently valued at $68 billion and has been around for considerably longer.
These values are taken from public data as of January 2022, the start of this year.
Yeah, FTX is also known for sponsoring some fairly high-profile things. They own the naming rights to the Miami Heat basketball stadium in Florida, FTX Arena, and they also sponsor TSM, which is an esports organization that I hadn't heard of, but Jesse, you've said is pretty well known.
Yeah, TSM, or Team Solo Mid, is a really prevalent organization in esports, especially in the League of Legends scene, if you follow that. But I believe they've branched out onto several other esports games as well.
Yeah. So we've mentioned that this was a pretty controversial decision, and we're definitely going to get into the reasons for that. But some of the specific things that I think made us sit up and take notice. There's been a large change for the reviews of Storybook Brawl on Steam in the past couple days.
Yeah, and this is actually what really tipped me off to the fact that this was a controversial topic. Previously, Storybook Brawl was sitting at roughly 85% positive rating on Steam. We had to do a little bit of math here and make some assumptions, so this number could be a little bit off. But the more important thing to note is that in the past month, the reviews went from that 85% positive number all the way down to 17% positive. Therefore, the reviews are mostly negative after this announcement.
Right, and just from stemming them up, just about all of them are criticizing this specific decision for the company to be acquired by FTX.
Yep. In addition to that, a lot of notable streamers and just people in general on the Discord servers, both our Discord server and on the official Storybook Brawl Discord server, have stated that they will be dropping the game as a result of this decision.
Right. Just this morning, I was listening to the 7th Tier podcast, our counterpart podcast that also covers Storybook Brawl, and they are closing their doors as well for similar reasons.
Despite all of these negative reactions to the decision, the overall player count for Storybook Brawl hasn't changed significantly during this time, which means that either the majority of players are not aware of the decision, are not really impacted by the decision, or they just don't see it as an issue.
Yeah, we're getting that data from Steam charts, which lets you see how many people are playing the game at any given time. The numbers today, as of the recording of this episode, are about the same as they were before the announcement.
All right, so that gets the what happened out of the way, but now we should ask the question, why? Why did Goodluck Games sell Storybook Brawl to FTX?
Yeah, I think that's not an incredibly intuitive thing. A cryptocurrency exchange is not the first business you would expect to buy a small video game company. And there's two reasons that they've stated. And the first one is just that people at FTX really like the game. Sam Bankman-Fried, who is one of the founders of FTX, had tweeted about enjoying the game months ago, and they specifically mentioned the announcement that a number of people from FTX had been playing the game and enjoyed it. One thing that I learned listening to the FTX podcast, which did an interview with some of the Storybook Brawl developers, is that Matt Place, who is one of the lead developers on Storybook Brawl, and Sam Bankman-Fried, the founder of FTX, are actually childhood friends. That's how they made the connection in the first place.
Yeah, FTX also has a relationship with LSV, Louis Scott Vargas, who is a professional Magic the Gathering player who also hosts some podcasts for that game.
Yeah, LSV hosts two podcasts, Limited Resources and Constructed Resources, and both of those are sponsored by FTX. And we should mention that he's also, I believe, the vice president of marketing at Goodluck Games. So that's how it's all tied together. So that's one reason. The other reason that they specifically mentioned in the announcement was that FTX wants to find a way to integrate cryptocurrency transactions into games. They said, "We saw an opportunity to be the vanguard for the ethical integration of gaming and crypto transactions in a way that hasn't yet been done in this space." So they are aiming to add some type of cryptocurrency or NFT technology into Storybook Brawl.
On the flip side, the reasons that Goodluck Games accepted this offer is pretty straightforward. Money.
Right. So this is a little bit reading between the lines. They haven't specifically said this, but I think it's fairly clear that Goodluck Games is a small game studio. They've mentioned that there's, I think, 5 or 6 people that work on the game, and it doesn't seem clear that they had a large revenue stream. While there are ways to spend money in Storybook Brawl, my impression is that a large proportion of the player base is free to play, and even the people that are spending money on the game are not spending tons of money on the game.
And while this is reading in between the lines a little bit, they have stated that they are looking forward to taking the game to the next level, using this money to enhance the visual aspects of the game, as well as take on some larger projects, add new team members to their development team, and increasing the size of tournaments, both in player base and prize pool.
Right. One thing that was recently announced is that the World Championship in December is now going to include a trip for the people that qualified to the Bahamas, which I guess is where FTX is based, but that's clearly an increase to the size of the prize pool as well.
Yeah. So with this decision, Goodluck Games has said a couple of statements about the acquisition. The first of which is that fun comes first.
Right. They have specifically mentioned that they want integrations with cryptocurrency, blockchain technology to be ethical and make the game better for players. And one thing that has come up in discussion is that they've stated that they have creative control. To quote the FAQ they posted on the Discord, if we don't find a way to include blockchain that is ethical, player-friendly, or gameplay first, we have the freedom to not include it. If we find something that uses the blockchain that is great for our players, we will explore it, and if not, we won't.
That being said, they have also stated that they will be exploring options for purchases using cryptocurrency, which might include cosmetics, but also might include gameplay elements.
To quote LSV on the Discord, he said, "To be clear, we are going to explore non-cosmetic angles." So that doesn't necessarily mean that they are for sure going to include those things in the game, but it's definitely something they're considering.
Finally, the cryptocurrency that they are currently stated to be investigating is Solana, which is one of the more environmentally friendly blockchains. We'll be talking a bit more about this point later. But according to Solana's website, a cryptocurrency transaction using Solana takes about twice as much energy as a Google search. So practically negligible as far as energy consumption goes.
Right. One of the big criticisms of cryptocurrency has been its environmental impact, and I think that actually is a good segue into our next section about why are people upset about this change.
Yeah, so we've kind of boiled it down to two of the biggest major concerns from the community that we wanted to cover here. The first of which is that the game will start incorporating cryptocurrencies, NFTs, the blockchain, etc., which will make the game overall a worse experience. The second major concern is the general objection to cryptocurrencies and NFTs as a whole, and linking the game to those technologies is an association that the player base does not want. Since the whole business of FTX is built on cryptocurrencies and NFTs, Storybook Brawl being acquired by that company directly associates it with that community.
Right.
So let's start with the first concern here, Sidney. Why are people afraid of integration harming the game?
Well, I think there's a few reasons. The first of which is that people just don't like the idea of seeing or interacting with cryptocurrency at all. If it's something you already don't like, which we'll talk about in a bit, then it's not a pleasant experience to see the FTX logo when you log in, to be following the Storybook Brawl Twitter account and see advertisements for Storybook Brawl related NFTs and so on. And that is actually something we've already seen. They've produced some NFTs based on game artwork of characters like Humpty Dumpty and Bearstain.
Yeah. Additionally, if you are able to purchase in-game currency with a cryptocurrency, then the simple presence of that option in the store is going to make that more in your face.
Yeah. Another thing that's extremely likely to happen, unless they decide not to do any integrations at all, is that the game will have to be removed from Steam. Steam is the way Storybook Brawl is currently distributed, and their terms of service don't allow any games that integrate cryptocurrency. So that would at the very least make it a little harder to work with the game.
A little harder to discover the game, and therefore the influx of new players is going to go down unless other marketing increases that in some way.
Yeah. So those are the things that are almost assuredly going to happen. And then I think there's a lot of things that at least seem somewhat likely to players that are also causes for concern. The first thing is the developers have said, their goal is to make the game better. They don't want to introduce something that makes the game less fun. But it is true that their incentives have changed somewhat after being acquired. They probably were not considering putting cryptocurrency NFT stuff into the game before. So even if they're not contractually required to include those things, they're still going down a road that maybe they wouldn't have if their goal was just to make a fun game.
Yep. In addition to that, FTX is now the owner of Storybook Brawl, so if they make the decision that something needs to be added, the devs are going to have to go along with that decision even if they don't want to. And while the initial announcements are saying that that is not going to happen, that doesn't mean that couldn't change in the future.
Right. So then going into some of the specific things that might be added that I think people might really disagree with. The first thing, and maybe the most likely, is NFT cosmetics. So the idea, cosmetic items are a pretty common concept, and Storybook Brawl even has a few custom avatars for certain heroes. But having those things tied to NFTs means that you're going to be seeing NFTs in the game, and while that might not actually change the gameplay experience that much, it's another case where something you really don't like is going to be kind of in your face if it's something that you're displaying to everyone else while you're playing against them.
Yeah, your opponents might have their own art for Good Boy that's different from the default art, for example. But a situation where it could affect something other than cosmetics, and I'm going to pull from an example from another game here, is maybe something like hero selection. So, for some context, Hearthstone Battlegrounds also has a hero selection menu, where you pick from 2 heroes instead of 4. However, if you pay money, then you have the full suite of 4 hero options at the start of each game. Storybook Brawl currently has a full 4, but that doesn't mean that they wouldn't change that in the future.
Right. So that's a situation where you're kind of more directly paying real money, or very well could be cryptocurrency, in order to gain an advantage in the game. Another possibility that I think some people have talked about is the idea of special heroes, characters, spells that are only available if you buy that certain NFT item in the game. If you have a special version of Good Boy that's larger, or a hero that has a special power that ends up being the strongest one available, it's easy to see how that could be worse for the game, in that people who are willing to buy in and pay extra money have an advantage.
Yeah, it would introduce a pay-to-win element to the game, which currently is not really a factor.
Yeah. Probably the worst case scenario here is if the game were to change pretty radically to become much more about just cryptocurrency and NFTs. There are a few games that are examples of this. For example, Axie Infinity is a game that's largely based around collecting NFTs. It still has a gameplay element, but it's advertised as sort of a pay-to-earn game, in the idea that a lot of people who are playing it are almost seeing it as an investment or a job. And there are a lot of concerns that come with that. The most obvious just being that can lead to a pretty unfun experience. But another criticism of a pay-to-earn game model like that is that it is effectively a scam. You're paying in money in the expectation of being paid out money, but clearly the game company has to make money too, so somebody's going to be stuck having paid in a bunch of money in expectation of being paid back and doesn't get that.
Yeah, it ends up sounding a lot like a pyramid scheme from an outside point of view.
Yeah, that definitely is pretty far from the way Storybook Brawl currently works, but given that is how some NFT games have ended up, that's definitely something that people are concerned about.
Yeah, so I think that covers some of the concerns that people have about a cryptocurrency or NFT-based video game. But what about just the affiliation with that community in general? Why is that something that people view negatively?
Well, there are 2 big criticisms of cryptocurrency and NFTs from an ethical point of view. And the idea is, regardless of how much of that is actually integrated into Storybook Brawl, by playing the game, you're associating with and, in a sense, promoting its parent company, FTX, which, as we said, their primary business is cryptocurrency. So the first one, some cryptocurrencies use a huge amount of electricity. The statistic that I've seen that was sort of the most notable is that Bitcoin uses more energy than Finland, which is a small country. Just the energy required to create and maintain the Bitcoin network. So, as we mentioned, Storybook Brawl has said that they're going to use Solana, which is a relatively environmentally friendly cryptocurrency. I haven't really found any arguments that it's not, but I think what people are more concerned about is that while Bitcoin and Ethereum, the other common cryptocurrency, aren't used by Storybook Brawl, they are the most popular traded products at FTX. Looking at their site, Bitcoin is by far the most traded cryptocurrency. So, that said, it is worth noting that FTX specifically has said that they're committed to environmental impact mitigation. They stated on their website that they've spent over $1 million in the past year on efforts to mitigate the environmental impact of the cryptocurrency that is traded on their exchange, and that effectively puts them at a point of being carbon neutral. That's difficult for us to evaluate as we're not experts in carbon mitigation, but I think it is worth noting.
The second major criticism of why cryptocurrency should not exist is that it is inherently prone to scams.
One video that we saw referenced very frequently on the Discord, and that I've seen a lot when it comes to online discussions of cryptocurrency in general, is the Folding Ideas YouTube video. It's called Line Goes Up, which is basically a 2-hour documentary that argues, well, it argues a lot of things. It's going to be tough to summarize all that on our show, but we'll do our best. The major arguments in that video are the claim that Bitcoin and cryptocurrencies in general are not effective as currencies. There's not a lot of things that you can buy with them, at least not currently. So their major function is to be an investment. People buy cryptocurrency in the hopes that its value will go up and they will be able to sell it later.
Additionally, cryptocurrencies are by nature electronic and therefore have no physical form, which makes it a lot harder to prove that a transaction has occurred. This just makes it generally easier for fraudulent claims or even theft to go by unnoticed or uninvestigated because there isn't a physical trail to follow.
Right. The video then talks about NFTs specifically, the non-fungible tokens, and while they're a way to have a sort of receipt tied to something, like a piece of artwork, that doesn't really prevent anyone from changing or reproducing that piece of artwork, and it doesn't represent anything legally. So it's sometimes claimed that owning the NFT of something, a meme or an image of someone's tweet, or a picture of a cartoon ape, confers some sort of ownership. But the video argues that's not really true in any meaningful sense. The aim is to create something that you can buy with cryptocurrency so that you can convince someone else that it's valuable.
Yeah, Sidney, I know you mentioned that there are also just a lot of explicitly scammy behaviors in the community, like selling your NFT to yourself for a higher value to artificially inflate the price.
Right, yeah. If I sell something to myself, buy it for $50,000, since the NFT market is relatively unregulated compared to more traditional stock exchanges, and also because it's decentralized, meaning that transactions are anonymous in a different sort of way, it's easier for people to perpetrate scams like that. But I think the video also makes the more general point that the culture of NFTs is geared toward getting other people to buy in so that you, the owner of the NFT, can sell out. So the argument then is that people in the NFT space are somewhere in the middle of either scamming or being scammed. The video also does have some other criticisms of other implementations of blockchain technology, such as smart contracts, that we're not going to cover here, but hopefully I did a good job of representing the main points at least.
Yeah, and while that video isn't like the source of truth for everything, it seems that a lot of people who are opposed to the cryptocurrency community seem to agree with most of, or not, if not all, of the points made in that video and reference that frequently.
From what it's worth, I did do some reading about responses from people in the cryptocurrency community to that video, and one thing I read is that they do agree with some of the discussions of scamming, but that if you are an advocate for cryptocurrency, you would argue that it has some inherent value, even though many of the implementations so far have resulted in scams effectively.
Okay, so I think that covers it for the background and what happened and why it matters. But we also wanted to give our opinions on the topic in general.
Yeah, you want to go first, Jesse?
Yeah, I think my opinion is a little bit shorter than yours. So overall, I'm pretty neutral on the acquisition. I don't think it's going to have nearly as big of an impact as the majority of the loud community does. And the reason for that is that the developers of Storybook Brawl very clearly care about the game. They don't have an incentive to make it worse. I don't believe that they were producing the game solely to make money, but rather because they wanted to work on a project that they felt invested in. And the fact that they're being acquired by a company shouldn't impact that, as long as they still have free reign on the direction they want the game to go in. From my outside point of view, it looks like that this is just a way for them to get sponsored, essentially, to have the money they need to move forward with some of their larger visions.
Yeah.
Additionally, I prefer to focus in on results rather than speculation. In my opinion, things in the future have way too many factors that can go into it. So because of that, it's really hard to determine what a single thing will do to a event, game, company, anything really in life. And I think we need to wait to determine how much this impacts the game overall, rather than jumping to conclusions and making decisions based on something that hasn't really happened yet.
That makes sense. What's your take on the ethical criticisms, the idea that Storybook Brawl is going to be associated with cryptocurrency now by virtue of being owned by FTX?
Yeah, for that topic, I think that we might be going a little bit too far down the hate chain here. Storybook Brawl being associated with FTX, which is associated with cryptocurrency, forms kind of 2 degrees of separation between cryptocurrency itself and Storybook Brawl. Just because you hate cryptocurrency doesn't mean that you should hate something that's indirectly linked to it. If you have complaints with the company as a whole, I could understand that concern, but I had never heard of the company before this, and acquisitions happen all the time. I don't feel like this one is particularly only particularly noteworthy because it involves something that I was interacting with, but I don't think that it'll have a significant impact on the game overall.
Gotcha. Yeah.
On top of that, I guess I'm not as concerned with cryptocurrency as a whole. I like to follow the ideology of let people enjoy things. And so if people want to spend their time investing in cryptocurrency, trading NFTs, they're welcome to do so. I personally don't care for it, but I don't want to hate on them for doing that.
That's fair, yeah.
What about you, Sidney? What are your thoughts on how this affects Storybook Brawl's future?
Yeah, so I guess to your first point, I think I mostly agree with you that this is not something that's likely to make the gameplay worse. FTX is too big a company to say that they're acquiring Storybook Brawl for money-making reasons. I don't think they're just looking to extract cash out of the player base. This isn't a massive game, and it seems like at least part of their reasons are that they enjoy it and presumably wouldn't want to change the things that make it enjoyable. In addition, like you said, not a lot has changed with the game yet. I did play a game this morning. It was the same as it was last week. And there's definitely still the opportunity to stop playing if they do introduce some new feature that makes it a worse game. It does seem like to me that the infusion of money into the game is probably going to result in some improvements. We've talked about things we'd like to see as far as the development, expanding the pool of characters, and that it's nice to see bigger tournaments, better graphics. Those things are likely to be improvements. I think in terms of being associated with the cryptocurrency industry in general, my feelings are a lot more complicated. I guess to start off, I am sympathetic to the criticism of just being associated with a company that has bad ethical impacts on the world. If Storybook Brawl were bought by a cigarette company like Philip Morris, I would probably feel pretty bad about playing, because it's, to me at least, that it seems like that's an industry that just has straightforward negative impacts on the world.
Yeah, so I guess it does make sense if you view it from that perspective, that if people view Bitcoin or cryptocurrencies as the same level of negative impact, then that stance definitely does make some sense.
Yeah. I think the environmental stuff is tricky. I am glad to hear that the actual Storybook Brawl game is going with an environmentally friendly cryptocurrency. And it does seem like it makes somewhat of a difference that FTX is at least putting effort into offsetting their carbon impact. But I also agree that there's a lot of scamminess, a lot of people investing money that they then lose because they're being essentially defrauded in the cryptocurrency industry. And I don't know how much of that is directly contained within FTX. They advertise themselves as being regulated, but realistically, they probably are making some amount of money off people losing money. I think one thing that almost falls into the facts category, but I think a lot of people would disagree about the impact, that does matter for me personally, is the sort of positive externalities of FTX in terms of social responsibility. I've talked before about being an effective altruist, believing in the idea that you can sort of find charities that optimize their level of positive impact in the world. And it's worth noting that the founder of FTX, the same guy that made the decision to buy the game, Sam Bankman-Fried, is a really noted effective altruist. He's given away From public numbers I found, he's given away between $50 and $100 million to effective causes, global poverty, climate change, biosecurity, pandemic preparedness. And one of his stated goals is to make more money in order to give more money. That's definitely a controversial idea. I think a lot of people would say that if you're making money by exploiting people in some way, then it doesn't matter that you're giving it away. But I do think the impact of that somewhat does matter. GiveWell, an organization that evaluates charities, figures that the most cost-effective way to save a life costs something like $5,000. Jesse, you and I have pretty good jobs. If we donated, 10% of our yearly income to that cause, to the Against Malaria Foundation or something similar, that's saving between 1 and 2 lives a year. If Sam Bankman-Fried is giving even 1% of his income to that cause, that's, by that same math, that's 10,000 lives. And he said that he plans to give more than that. So I think there are probably going to be some listeners that are skeptical of that math or just of the idea of trade-offs in general. And I think that's totally legitimate. But it does make a difference to me. Whereas if the stated goal of FTX was just to make money, that might not be the case. That said, I'm really kind of undecided. I think you put it as cautiously pessimistic, Jesse.
Yeah, to put words into your mouth. You seem like you're prepared for the worst case scenario, but you're really hopeful that doesn't happen.
Yeah. I think probably the last thing to mention is that this has been a cultural shift around the game. In the past week, there's been a lot of criticism and debate of the acquisition, and, it's not that common that you just unsell a company, so that's likely to continue. Definitely a different and I think worse vibe than when people were just talking about the best strategies or things they'd like to see change in the next patch. And I think that actually has impacted my reasoning a bit. I'm not sure I would have come to the same conclusion if other people weren't also upset. It's really hard to say. I don't know if I would have come to this conclusion on my own. That's not to say that other people are wrong. I'm honestly not sure. So, I don't know. I think I probably am going to stick with the game, at least for now. It is really enjoyable. It does seem like a lot of the people involved have good intentions. And while there are definitely legitimate ethical concerns, I guess I haven't seen any kind of slam dunk reasoning that says this is definitely a bad thing to do. But it's also definitely made me think more about supporting the game, promoting it, and overall I think my feelings are a heck of a lot more mixed than they were a week ago. So, that does bring us to the end of the episode, and we should talk about what comes next. Like I said, I want to give this some thought and decide whether it makes sense to keep going with the podcast. So, my plan is to take a week off, and then I'll post an update to the podcast feed in 2 weeks on April 12th. That update might be the end, and thanks for listening, or it might be the next episode. Either way, I'll make sure to let you all know. That all said, I do want to thank all of our listeners for sticking with us. I know that I've had a really good time getting involved in the game, preparing for the episodes, figuring out strategy, hearing from the community, and I really appreciate that folks have taken the time to listen and support the podcast. And everyone that's posted a positive comment or even a question has brought, a little bit of happiness to my heart, And Jesse, I also want to thank you. I think you've been an awesome co-host. I've really enjoyed hanging out with you and talking about the game and figuring out how we want to communicate things. And I wouldn't have been able to do this really fun thing without you.
Yeah, I really enjoyed it too, Sidney. When you first asked me if I wanted to co-host a podcast, I gotta admit I was really skeptical, but I've had a lot of fun along the way, talking about the game, interacting with everybody, and just because I'm moving on from the game doesn't mean I'll forget it. That's for sure. Yeah,
so as always, thanks for listening. Our Discord, Twitter, and email will still be around. As always, you can find our backlog of episodes on our website and on major podcasting platforms. And at least you'll be able to find me playing Storybook Brawl. My username is Cougar305.
And if I return to the game in the future, you could find me as Undefined. But thanks for listening, everybody.
All right, Jesse, we can't let it go without one last storybook story time.
Yeah, it wouldn't feel right. But I don't have a story for this week. Do you?
I do. I thought it would be fun to return to the bygone days of Storybook Brawl, and specifically to a particular hero that has gone through a lot of changes. Do you remember the old version of Sad Dracula?
Give all of your characters in your front row slay. I get plus one attack.
Oh yeah, that version was pretty crazy. I'm actually thinking of the second oldest version of the hero, though.
Oh, the one where your first character has slay, I get +3/+1 permanently?
Yeah. That was an interesting metagame. I'm specifically thinking of a particular build that it was possible to assemble back that time, particularly with the old version of Shadow Assassin.
Shadow Assassin used to get +1/+1 whenever it saw a slay trigger, rather than just +1 attack.
Right. So there's a reason they changed that to just scale attack. Getting high health is pretty busted on ranged characters. And in particular, there was a pretty crazy build you could assemble with Sad Dracula. So the way it worked was you put a Shadow Assassin, or sometimes some other ranged character, but usually a Shadow Assassin, in slot 1. And then you fill the entire rest of your board with 0 attack characters. Soul Attack Ancients, Rotten Apple Trees, and even stuff like Baby Root and Sleeping Princess, who you would not actually want to awaken.
So, since all of your characters have 0 attack, that means the only character that ever strikes is your Shadow Assassin.
Right. And while it can be a bit of a challenge to get that going, once it's attacked a couple of times, it ends up with like 20 attack, which at that point in the game, 3.1, 3.2, it's going to slay on every hit.
So, your Shadow Assassin slays every single one of your opponent's characters and gets +3 or +4/+2 for each of them.
Exactly. And it only gets better from there. You can combine it with a Bad Moon to give an additional +1/+2. You can even throw in some Lightning Dragons for utility since they don't actually take up an attack. In particular, I have here a screenshot of a game I played back in the day, and my board is as follows. Soul Attack Ancient, Rotten Apple Tree, Sleeping Princess, Lightning Dragon, 170, 153 upgraded Shadow Assassin.
Yeah, that's a pretty amusing single unit build. That was good enough to hit you first place.
Yeah, I think probably there were some ways to tech against this. Certainly you're in a bit of trouble if you ever run into a Rotten Apple Tree on the opposing side. Although the Soul Attack Ancients did do a good job of absorbing hits for you. So ultimately, I think that was one of my favorite comps to play, even though I think there's probably a good reason they changed the way it worked a bit.
That is true.
Anyway, that's it for now. I'll see you in a couple weeks.
Goodbye.